Okay, so this is going to be a short video talking about the pathways that I previously talked about in my longer video, which is like 27 minutes. The reason why that one's so long is because I did include extra information, not extra information, but information that you may need to know to understand the material, to grasp the material, to review the material. So go to the long video if you want more explanations of what's going on. And if you're really unsure of where to start, I would start there. This video is really just to go through each step of the pathways that happens. And it's just quick and dirty, especially if you just really want a quick review. And also, like, 27 minutes? Like, anyway, let's start off with the somatic pathways, which there are two, motor and sensory. Let's start off with sensory, and let's say we want to innervate something that's in the deep back, which is specifically multifidus. Where are we going to start? We always start in the anterior horn. So first, anterior horn, go through this anterior root, go through the spinal nerve, which is a mix because you have information that's coming from both ends through there. And then once you're at the spinal nerve, you have two pathways to go through, posterior ramus or anterior ramus. If you want to innervate multifidus, you have to go through the posterior ramus because that's where you have the deep back muscles and the skin overlying it. Let's say instead of innervating something in the deep back, we want to innervate something like the quads. Well, first, we're going to start off again at the anterior horn, go through this anterior root, pass through that spinal nerve, and since the quads, it's not in the back area, we're going to go through the anterior ramus because that's where everything else is located at. No back, basically. So this would include the quads. So that's somatic motor. If we switch to somatic sensory, we're going to have information transmitting from the body to the brain. So let's say we're getting information from multifidus. Let's say we're feeling pain or just general sensation. So if we're getting information from multifidus, we're going to start off at the rami. So specifically, the posterior ramus is our starting point because that's where multifidus is located in the deep back. So this is step number one. We're going to go through this posterior ramus, enter the spinal nerve, and then go through the posterior root area. Well, first, to enter the dorsal root ganglion, synapse there, still in the posterior root, and then we're going to enter the posterior horn. Now let's say we're getting sensation info or pain from the quads. Instead of starting off in the posterior ramus, we're going to start off with the anterior ramus because that's where the information is coming from. We're going to do anterior ramus, go through the spinal nerve, and you may think it's going to go through the anterior portion, but no. Sensation info, no matter where it's coming from, will always pass through the posterior part of the nerve. So again, if we start at the beginning, we're getting information from the quads, so it's entering the anterior ramus, going through that spinal nerve, entering this posterior root area to enter the dorsal root ganglion. It's going to enter that posterior root, and then it's going to enter that posterior horn. So just like how in the somatic motor, everything starts at anterior horn, and somatic sensory, everything ends in posterior horn. Now let's get to the more difficult stuff, which is the visceral motor pathway, which is innervating structures from T1 to L2. And this is, again, information coming from the brain to the body. And if we think visceral, think organ. So don't quote me, but I believe this is to innervate organs, further functions that you don't necessarily think about. It's not like in muscles where you can voluntarily contract something. So for visceral, I still have notes from the previous video that I did. So this is, again, the pathway we need to remind ourselves that we're going to go through. If you want to pause the video here, do so now so you can write down what's going to occur. So we're going to start off at the intermedial lateral column, which is usually in this area over here. We're going to go to the anterior horn, enter this anterior root area, enter or pass through the spinal nerve. And if we want to innervate something at that level, we're going to go straight through this anterior ramus and go through to find that organ at that level. But let's say we want to innervate something not at that level. So to do that, I'm going to reference this diagram. Let's say we're starting off at T3. Okay, we're at the intermedial lateral column. We're going to go through the anterior horn, anterior root, go through that spinal nerve, enter the anterior ramus area. And if we're not innervating something at that level, we're going to enter the white ramus communicans. And then let's say we want to innervate a structure at T2, okay? We're going to go through this change, which I believe is called the sympathetic chain. Please double check me, but I'm pretty sure it is. Regardless, what I know for sure is that it's a chain. So we're going to go through this white ramus communicans, go through this change, go to that level that we want to get at, and then synapse at this ganglion called the paravertebral ganglion. Synapse here with the gray, synapse here, and then we're going to go through this area. I don't know if you can really see it that well, but this little pathway right here called the gray rami communicans. And then we can either go through posterior ramus if it's located there, or the anterior ramus if that structure is in that area. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the pathways. That's a quick and dirty version. If you have any questions, please let me know. And yeah, hope it's helpful.